Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the graveyard shift, where the idea is to put on something which is exciting and stimulating. So I'm here to talk to you about theory to practice, implementing data protection by design in business processes. That sounds like a bit of a challenge to make this exciting, but I'll give it a go. Okay, so I work at Jisc. I'm the head of information, data and analytics. Do people know who Jisc are? A few people will, but a lot of people won't. Okay, so we are a not-for-profit charity that supports the higher and further education sector in anything digital, basically. So for any of you who's been at university, you'd have used the IT infrastructure, which links all the universities across the UK. That is the Janet network. It's one of the fastest networks in the world. We do the Wi-Fi. We do all sorts of stuff around technology and the digital world. I wanted to ask a very quick question. Raise your hands if you're data protection officers. Oh, that's sort of we've got half and half. So, as always, trying to work out how to pitch this. So here we go. The first thing I want to say, the key thing for me about data protection and the take-home thing that you need to consider about data protection, it's about the rights and individuals of the data subjects that you are processing that data for, and that should always be in your mind when you're doing any work which involves personal data. So the 6 rules, some of you here will know these all off by heart. So when you are processing personal data, you need to make sure that it's used fairly, lawfully and transparently. It's used for specified explicit purposes. If you want to do something new with the data, then you need to think about getting back to those people, particularly if you've used consent. It's used in a way that is adequate and relevant and limited to only what is necessary. Accurate and where necessarily kept up to date. That can be quite challenging. It needs to be kept for no longer than is necessary. Okay, lots of IT people, when I say that, you can see the panic going across their faces as they think of all that personal data hidden in their systems. And handled in a way that ensures appropriate security, including protection against unlawful and unauthorized processing, access, loss, destruction, or damage. So those 6 things you need to think about whenever you are processing personal data. Okay. So, I'm a big fan of the Data Protection Act and the GDPR. It's got some really, really good stuff in it. And one of them is the data protection by design, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Now, we could have 25 minutes of going through the theoretical Article 25, going to great detail. I'm not sure you would get much out of it. I'm pretty sure I won't get much out of it either. So, really good piece of legislation, but just to try and unpick it, basically, I think already it's been mentioned before, previously it was known by privacy by design, and it was one of those nice things to do and thing you should do. Big difference now. It is now a legal requirement. It is mandatory. You have to do this. Under the Data Protection Act 2018 and under GDPR. So when you are designing services that include the processing of personal data, a data controller has to consider the risks, likelihood, and severity of the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. The first point I made slightly earlier on. So that includes things like data protection requires appropriate technical and organizational measures to implement the data protection principles. So we've got to make sure we get the right technical security around any piece of work that you're doing. And I work very closely with the head of information security who does that aspect of the data protection for and with me. We integrate safeguards into your processing so that you meet the DPA requirements. All about protecting the individual rights again. We need to integrate, people often say, bake in data protection by design at that design phase. And that can be, quite a challenge, but also right the way through a process. And we needed to consider the data protection and privacy issues up front in everything that you do. Help ensure data protection compliance and forming part of the accountability that you should be doing, around transparency and accountability. So, how do we do data protection by design then? Well, if you Google it, it's always a good start, isn't it? See what other people are doing. There seems to be a focus on some good things and some sort of quite basic things. So you will see things around privacy notices, making sure you've got your privacy notices right, both for your internal but also your external data protection processing. So the key thing about privacy notices now, instead of them, do you remember those privacy notices? Apple were really good at it, and you had the privacy notice with their terms and conditions. You had to scroll through about 30 pages, and you gave up after one. I sometimes got to page 2 of the scroll, but okay, so now it has to be simple and easy to understand. So the way that we've done it at Jisc is that we have done a templated approach. We have a master privacy notice on our website that you can click to straight away. And then for the myriad of services that we do, we then have a shorter privacy notice which really focuses on what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, do we share that with any third parties, how long do we keep it for? And those are the 4 key things on a privacy notice, which you can get into quite often into a paragraph. So nice, short and concise. So that's data protection by design, and a very worthwhile doing. Some people count putting your data protection policy onto a website as data protection by design. I think it's a bit of a cheat, to be honest. Other people do the same thing with subject access guidance, and they say, yep, we got that on our website, so we're doing data protection by design. It's not really. But data protection impact assessments are another really good way of starting to think about the data that you're processing and mitigating against the risks. And we've done a couple of data protection impact assessments on a couple of our big risk areas, and they're available on our website to see. So it goes through what the risks are and what the mitigations we put in place. And if it's one of them is for our learning analytics program, and it's actually a good piece of marketing. They were really, really keen on it because it actually we're out there saying, here are the risks, this is what we're doing about it. But for me, in Jisc, I have a challenge. Okay, so we have 2 internal-facing directorates, and we have a lot of external-facing directorates. And those external-facing directorates are offering up to 130 services to the sector. Some of them are part of the core package, some of those are extras for them to purchase, and a lot of them are processing personal data, quite often student data. So, for me, the challenge was, okay, so data protection by design, where are the risk areas? What are we doing in Jisc that I really need to focus in on? So there was 2 for me. One is systems, the systems that we were procuring, and the second one are the services that we are providing to our customers. There is a third one, particularly around the systems bit. Of course, we've got a big issue of the myriad of systems we've already got in place and trying to get them sorted as well. But I wanted to make sure we weren't going to add to the issues that I've got with existing systems. So, the first thing that I did was, in effect, I've created, I'm certainly not the first, as a lot of people have done this approach, a mini data protection impact assessment. But I haven't called it that. I think I've just called it a data assessment. And what that actually does is a short form that I wanted to capture information about a procurement or about a service. Not what I didn't want to do was say, tell me what personal data you're processing, because chances are a lot of people who are working in my company might not think it's personal data, or it's only got emails and stuff, so that's fine, that isn't what data means. So basically I've said, tell me what you are processing, what you're collecting, and then I make the decision. So I think that's an important thing to remember. And basically, from that, we can work out the really, really tricky bit. Most of the time we can work this out. Sometimes we have to take it and throw it around a little bit. And that's around the relationship. Who is the data controller? Who is the data processor? Is it a data controller to data controller? Or are we the data processor and our customer the data controller? So from that, we can pull that out. We can also make an assessment from this to how much personal data is actually involved in that process. If there isn't very much, then David relaxes a little bit. If there's a lot, David gets a little bit more anxious and gets involved in that actual piece of work. And we will then apply the appropriate privacy notices and from our templated approach. And also we look at legal T's and C's as well on that. And we update some of our back office stuff. I could talk a lot about records of processing activities and information asset registers at probably not the best time of the day to be talking about those things. But any data protection officers in here will go, yeah, okay, yeah, he's right, we need to do that. So, what I thought I would do, that was the theory bit. Was that all right? Yeah, that wasn't too bad for theory. So what I wanted to do was just to quickly run through some processes. I've picked some processes that might mean something to yourselves as well. We've done quite a lot of this processing work, and it's just a matter of trying to pick something that would work for you. So I'm sure that most of you, your company will be doing procurement of systems or services. This is how we've embedded data protection by design into that process. So we stopped buying HR systems that aren't compliant, things like that. So the first thing that, following the procurement route, is the good old statement of requirements that procurement need to do to when they actually push out to go out to tender. So that's one avenue. The other avenue is around the actual service manager who wants whatever we're procuring. So the first thing that he gets sent to him by the procurement team is the data assessment form, the DPIA, which you've just seen. So you can see right at the very beginning of that procurement process, I've got an idea of what's going on. Sometimes I'll look at that and go, actually, we've already got a product that does that, and then that goes off on another discussion. But so back to the statement of requirements. I now have a set of mandatory GDPR and information security requirements that go into any of our procurements. Now, I've got about 10 of them, and it's basically we look at what's procuring and we mix and match it. And if it's something a little bit, ooh, I haven't come across that, I might add an extra thing in, like a marketing tool, and just getting some stuff around that. So we have that embedded now in the process. Most of the service managers and certainly the suppliers breathe heavy breath when they see that there's all this DPA stuff going in. Really, really useful. Back then at the data assessment form stage, looking at that, so the compliance team, that's very grand. The compliance team is me, and I've got a member of staff who does a little bit of help. But I've got a DPO coming soon, so to help me out. So we will then assess the form and make a decision about how much we need to get involved in that process. So at the moment, we are re-procuring our HR system. I am embedded in the whole of the procurement and the rollout because it is, as you know, stuffed full of personal and sensitive personal data. Back to the mandatory requirements, we review what comes back and then we do a clarification stage. That's brilliant because most suppliers, when you say, where is the data being stored, don't actually understand what that means and give you their privacy notice or their policy and don't actually say it's in the EEA, it's in the UK, whatever. So there's quite a few clarifications. They get very frazzled around retention. I ask a question about retention of data. We will do some design work with the project if needed. Privacy notices will go out on our website or our intranet, depending if it's internal or external. That's our procurement process. Moving along then. So as I said, Jisc, we have a lot of services, say over 130 services, and a lot of those are processing personal data. So I was very concerned about that, and we basically have now moved to a position when there is a new service idea, somebody comes up, got a really good idea for a service, they have to go through what's called our products portal with our products team. And they have a set of criteria that you have to go through at this very early stage, these steps. And one of those is the data assessment form. So we get automatically this filled in and sent back to us. So we are still in this design phase. It comes to us. We will make an assessment again, as we did with the procurement one, about how much involvement we need to get in that. So there might be some GDPR design work. We're still in the design phase, and data protection is being put into these new services that we do. Then we come to the R&D phase. Now, shock horror, we actually make sure, particularly if it's external facing and it might be using live data in an R&D environment, that's another discussion. There will be privacy notices done for that. And our legal team then get involved and put in the T's and C's. I work very closely with our legal team. We have a set of data protection terms, and we have a number, and we just apply which ones, if we're a processor and processing a lot of personal data, then there'd be one thing that we put in, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I've tried to embed. I then came across a problem. Okay, so services go live, and then they like to do some new products. So how am I going to get those to those products? Because they're not going to go through that service design loop. So I've been working really closely with, again, it's working out, you've got to work out where your risk areas is. So we do learning analytics at Jisc. And it is one of those really, the way forward is actually starting to look at data, putting it into a data warehouse, mashing it up, and then coming out with some analytics from that. DPOs sat in the audience are now starting to fidget slightly because that opens you up to all sorts of things. So our learning analytics team, I work really, really closely, so closely that they actually see me as part of their team now, particularly when there's new features. Now, those new features usually come from 2 or 3 universities, might say, hey, what we would like you to do is this. The question is that I've thrown back to our developer team is, have they spoken, because they're data controllers, have they spoken to their DPO yet about what they're proposing? And the answer usually is no, but we'll come on to that. So I get a description of what the new feature is that they're proposing. We're in the initial assessment stage, design stage. And what we do is identify what types of personal data there is, how long we need to keep it for. I will look at what's being proposed to see if I think there's any privacy issues in there. I'll give you an example in a minute. In fact, I'll give you an example now. So a couple of 2 or 3 universities are looking at the library service and books borrowed, and can you make an assumptions from any analytics around what the students are looking at to how their attainment and success. So if they're not using the library very much, then this could be an early flag that there could be an issue. There's all sorts of things around that which made me very, very nervous. One of them actually, a lot of students use online stuff, so how successful would that actually be? But I was concerned about actually identifying the books that they're looking at in a library, and the privacy notices around that's fine if it's core textbooks, but what else are they looking at? And should the university be assessing and tracking that? Obviously, the library has to do it to make sure the books come back, but that's fine. So I put that, I put my concerns. Our team went back. They then came back to us and said, no, we want it done. So it was falling on me. I'm not their data controller, DPO for them. So we went back to them and said, if you've spoken to your DPO and they sign up for this, then yeah, that's fine if they're taking the responsibility. 2 out of 3 came back and said, whoa, no way. We don't want to go anywhere near this. So it's trying to get our customers to get DP by design as well. Anyway, we look at the impact risk. I will give some initial guidance around it. We identify design options to reduce those risks, so we play around with that. Final consultation with me, so I just as the DPO for Jisc, I say, yeah, that's fine. From our side, we're okay on that because we're usually the processors. I sign it off, the product owner signs it off. It gets added to the backlog for development. Okay, so we haven't even developed it yet, and that's DP now in there. And I just wanted to finish off by, I think I've got time, just to finish off, last example, learning analytics again. Legal basis for processing. You thought you got away with it, but so I'm going to talk very quickly about that. The university sector tend to use, certainly for learning analytics, there's 4 legal bases for processing that you could potentially use. 2 of them are quite problematic, and of course they're the ones that they like to use, but anyway. So one is around contracts. So when a student signs up on day one with a huge contract full of stuff that they're going to do with their data, is that unambiguous and freely given consent? I think it could be challenged. Second one, public task. Universities come under public task, so they like public task. I worry about public task because it is very limited. It doesn't protect the rights of the individuals, aren't in the equation at all. It can be used, but I think they have to be careful how they use that. My favourite, legitimate interest, because obviously you have a legitimate interest test that you do, which I think is great. Consent. Okay. Consent, I always put that number 6 because consent has to be freely given, but also can be removed as easily. So if you're building systems, you're going to have to make sure you can pull out data if requested. So we are doing work. We got work around early flags for students who are struggling, and it's looking at their attainment, how they're doing on their courses, and also their attendance. And so basically the bottom there are the existing data collection type systems, the student record, the VLE, the library. That then goes into what we call the Learning Data Hub, which is a data warehouse in effect. And from that we can do some analytics predictor stuff. We have to be really, really careful, do a lot of work on that one. And then we produce various apps. So there might be a staff dashboard called the Data Explorer. So that will actually then flag up students within their class who it's got low attainment and low attendance. There is a student app called Student Goal, which encourages students to do that. They consent, so that's all done through consent. And there's other dashboards as well. So when we're looking at that one, we have some stages. So I'll just run through this very quickly. So you've already seen some of the collection, what we call data debris. So this is stuff which has already been collected. So course grade data, attendance data. Legitimate interest, that's been collected. It's been collected for years and years and years and years and years. It's in an electronic format, not in a register. That then can be analysed in the data warehouse. And again, it's around pattern finding. It's not identifying individuals as such. It's just looking for patterns. So low attendance and the like. We used legitimate interest, but you have to do the legitimate interest test to make sure that it has a minimal impact on the student. And for 98% of the time, what will come out is that there's a load of students who pass. You know, they're doing well, their attainment's good, their attendance is good. You don't need to do anything, they're not identified as such. It just pushes through. Just going back on that, on the donation side, I showed you the student goal app, so obviously that's consented extra information that can go into the analysis. And what we're really after is trying to identify those at risk of potentially failing. And it's at that point, at the intervention point, that we have recommended that you go for consent. So you're not asking consent at the front end, because for 98% of the students, they won't be identified as such. They just tick through. So it pulls out those people who are struggling. At that point, the tutor will go to them and say, we've noticed you've got problems and issues with attendance and attainment. Would you like us to help? And the students can make a decision. So that's the process that we've worked out around that. It's, a lot of the work's done by my colleague, Andrew Cormack, around that. He's our sort of privacy expert and the like. So just to finish off, then, just a few summary takeaway points. Privacy as a default setting. Design any system or service to protect personal data automatically. The more automated processing you can get in, the better. Make sure that you embed data protection. It forms a core part of your functions of any system or service that you're doing. Make sure you've got end-to-end security. I didn't talk much about security, but say our security team are all over this as well to make sure that it's fine. And make sure that you destroy the data securely when it's no longer needed. There's a challenge. I've got the learning analytics team now doing that. We've got a nice way, because we're the processors, so we don't do the destruction. We've got a really easy electronic way that the data controllers now can identify and destroy personal data. Respect the privacy of the users. Whatever you do, it's got to be user-centric. Be proactive and not reactive. Be preventative, not remedial. And, that's interesting. Sorry, that was deleted because this slide I borrowed from another one, so we won't worry too much about that. We deleted that earlier, that was odd. Okay then, so if you want any discussion or thought around, there's my email at the top. There's a link to our website, that's our GDPR bit, very HEFE sector based. My colleague Andrew Cormack does a blog on any any legislation, I should say, which affects the sector. He will blog on that to give advice and guidance. Not advice, David, guidance around that. And if you're interested in the learning analytics, there's a link to our code of practice that we've got in place around that. That's me. Thank you very much.